Welcome to the adventure of the Spectral Saboteur, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series The Lost Cases of Young Sherlock. Before Baker Street, playing in the year 1874. The world knows of my adventures with Mr. Sherlock Holmes from the day we took our lodgings in Baker Street. But what of the man before I knew him? By a stroke of tremendous fortune, a collection of papers has recently come into my possession from the estate of his university friend, Victor Trevor. These letters and journals form a unique record of Holmes's earliest cases, offering a glimpse into the crucible where his singular talents were forged between the years 1872 and 1877. From this remarkable collection, I shall begin with a most peculiar affair that tested his burgeoning scientific mind. I present to you The Adventure of the Spectral Saboteur. Chapter 1. As autumn's chill crept in, rain lashed the tall windows. Inside, warmth enveloped us, mingled with the scent of old leather and pipe tobacco. It was the third monthly gathering of the Dilettante Detectives Club, a society of gentlemen who fancied themselves amateur investigators, though their pursuits seldom strayed beyond disputed wills and missing pets. Suddenly, the heavy oak door was thrown open with a crash that silenced the room. A gust of wind and rain swept in, extinguishing a candle near the threshold. Framed in the doorway stood a man, his hair wild, his face pale and glistening with rain. He clutched a tweed coat about him, his chest heaving with exertion and some greater agitation. "It has come again. The phantom. My orchid, my work. It is being destroyed. You must help me," answered Professor Thaddeus Armitage. It was Professor Thaddeus Armitage, the university's foremost botanist. I saw Sherlock Holmes, who had been lounging in a wingback chair, sit bolt upright. His customary languor vanished in an instant, his keen eyes fixed upon the distraught academic. Constable Grimshaw, a stout, red-faced man whose presence lent the club a veneer of officialdom, rose to his feet with a weary scrape of his chair. Now, Professor, let's have less of this phantom talk. It'll be students, mark my words, always is, just a bit of high spirits and a bedsheet," Constable Grimshaw replied. "Mischief, bah, this is malicious sabotage, Constable. The greenhouse locked from within. No footprints, no entry, yet each dawn another petal bruised, another leaf withered. I tell you, it's a spectral presence, a ghoul with a vendetta," Professor Thaddeus Armitage said. The professor's voice had risen to a near shriek, trembling with a mixture of terror and outrage. Holmes, however, leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression one of intense concentration. "Locked from the inside, you say, and the damage is methodical, not random vandalism, but a slow, systematic destruction," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's voice was sharp and clear, cutting through the professor's frantic narrative. Armitage turned to him, a flicker of hope in his wild eyes. "Precisely, as if it knows precisely how to wound the plant without killing it outright. It prolongs the agony. My life's work, the Armitage orchid, prepared for the exhibition, ruined," remarked Professor Thaddeus Armitage. "A phantom botanist. Bah, stuff and nonsense. I've got pickpockets in the market and a brawl down at the docks to see to. Real police work, not chasing shadows in a hothouse," remarked Constable Grimshaw. The constable spoke with the gruff finality of a man who dealt only in tangible evidence, crowbars and broken locks. He made to sit down again, but Holmes held up a hand, halting him. "On the contrary, Constable, this is the most fascinating case to have graced this club in a year. A saboteur who leaves no trace, a locked-room mystery, and a victim convinced of a supernatural agent. Professor, you say the greenhouse was locked. Did you yourself secure it?" Sherlock Holmes noted. "I did, with my own hands. I'm the only one with a key," answered Professor Thaddeus Armitage. "And yet, observe, Professor, the faint, dark smudge on your right cuff. That is no common city grime. It is potting soil, is it not? Freshly disturbed. You have been to your greenhouse since making your discovery this morning." Sherlock Holmes responded. Armitage looked down at his sleeve, his mouth agape. A stunned silence fell over the room as the other members absorbed the simple, yet brilliant, observation. This is no matter of phantoms, gentlemen, but one of human ingenuity. The club will take the case. Professor, I shall require a tour of your facilities at the earliest opportunity. Tomorrow, at first light, we shall visit this haunted greenhouse and meet your spectral saboteur. As the handsome cab rattled along, carrying Victor Trevor and myself from the clamorous city to the sedate university district, the morning air grew crisp with scholarly promise. Professor Armitage met us at the gate, his face drawn and pale. Without a word of greeting, he gestured for us to follow, his hurried footsteps echoing on the gravel path as he led us towards a great structure of glass and iron that shimmered in the weak sunlight. The moment we stepped inside the greenhouse, a wave of warm, humid air enveloped us, thick with the scent of damp earth and 1,000 exotic blossoms. The gentle, rhythmic dripping of water from condensation on the high panes was the only sound. Armitage, his voice trembling with a mixture of reverence and despair, pointed towards a plant that sat alone on a central pedestal. There she is, gentlemen, the Phalaenopsis armitagia, my life's work, or what remains of it, remarked Professor Thaddeus Armitage. I drew closer and could not suppress a gasp. The orchid was a marvel, with a dozen pristine, moon-white blossoms arranged upon a graceful stem, each one a picture of perfection. The vibrant life of the other blooms made the ruin of the most prominent one all the more stark. Its edges were blackened and curled, the entire petal system wilted and decayed as if touched by some instantaneous, venomous blight. Good heavens, Professor, it looks as though it has been scorched by a flame, responded Victor Trevor. No earthly flame could cause this. It's as if a deathly chill withered the very life force. Last night, during my final rounds, doors bolted, premises secure, I witnessed a horror. A shimmering, vaguely human shape hovered over the bloom, radiating an unearthly cold. I cried out, and in an instant, it vanished, Professor Thaddeus Armitage replied. Whilst the professor delivered his dramatic account, Holmes had already dropped to one knee, ignoring the tale of apparitions entirely. He produced his familiar pocket lens and began a minute examination of the afflicted blossom, his focus absolute. The air was still, save for the soft rustle of a nearby fern. You state the greenhouse was locked from the inside, Professor, replied Sherlock Holmes. Bolted, I possess the only key. It is a physical impossibility, I tell you, replied Professor Thaddeus Armitage. Holmes did not reply at once. His sharp gaze left the orchid and traveled upwards. I heard the faint creak of his boots on the iron grating as he shifted his weight to look, his eyes tracing the framework to the ventilation grates set high in the glass roof. He then returned his attention to the plant, pointing with the tip of his finger to the base of the ruined petal. An impossibility presented as a fact is a deception, Professor, and here is a fact the spectre was careless enough to leave behind. Observe, Trevor, observed Sherlock Holmes. I leaned forward, squinting. There, clinging to the delicate tissue of the plant, was a scattering of a fine, crystalline powder. It was almost invisible, a faint dusting that seemed to shimmer like frost when the light struck it, an unnatural sparkle against the dying bloom. What is it? Some manner of chemical, Victor Trevor replied. Precisely. It is granular, not organic. Have you employed any new fertilizers or pesticides, Professor? Any compound whatsoever? Sherlock Holmes noted. None. My methods are rigorously controlled. This is unnatural, responded Professor Thaddeus Armitage. Holmes rose to his feet, carefully scraping a minute sample of the powder into a small glassine envelope he produced from a waistcoat pocket. He then paced the narrow central walkway, his footsteps ringing sharply on the iron grating. He tested the lock on the heavy door, and I heard the bolt slide home with a dull, metallic thud. He ran a finger along the seals of the glass panes and stared once more, long and hard, at the ventilation system high above our heads. Our examination of the greenhouse concluded, we left the humid, living air behind us. The heavy iron door closed with a final, echoing clang, the sound swallowed by the open quiet of the college gardens. We followed the professor across a manicured lawn to his private study in the main college building. Once inside the professor's study, the atmosphere changed entirely. The air grew dry, thick with the scent of old paper and dried herbs. Armitage sank into a leather armchair, the springs groaning in protest. The entire affair left me utterly perplexed, and I could not help but break the heavy silence. A locked room, a phantom, and a blighted flower. It is a case for a spiritualist, not a detective, replied Victor Trevor. It is a case for a chemist, Trevor, Sherlock Holmes noted. Holmes's voice was quiet, but carried an electric intensity. He held the small envelope of powder up to the light from the window, his grey eyes glinting. The phantom is a distraction, designed to appeal to an academic's dramatic sensibilities. The true culprit is not a ghost, but a man with access, a motive, and at least a rudimentary knowledge of botany. Tomorrow we shall abandon the hunt for spirits and begin the search for whispers amongst the living. The morning after our visit to Professor Armitage's violated sanctum found us once more upon the university grounds. A brisk wind swept across the manicured lawns. It carried with it the scent of damp earth and the rustle of autumn leaves. In the distance, I could hear the rhythmic scrape of a gardener's spade on a gravel path and the faint chime of a college bell marking the hour. Holmes, however, seemed entirely unaffected by the chill, his hawk-like gaze fixed upon the great glass house that stood shimmering in the pale sunlight. The phantom, Watson, is a creature of perception. To hunt it, we must first understand the eyes that see it. We shall begin not with the professor, but with those who tend his garden, declared Sherlock Holmes. He led the way not to the main entrance, but around to the potting sheds. From within, we could hear the clatter of terracotta pots and the low murmur of conversation. As we rounded the corner, the sounds abruptly ceased. A handful of young assistants and students looked up from their morning tasks, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and caution. Holmes, with an easy charm I had not previously seen him employ in an academic setting, stepped forward and began to make inquiries. The talk was of little substance at first, idle gossip of the professor's eccentricities and the immense pressure surrounding the exhibition. Yet, beneath the surface pleasantries, a current of professional jealousy was unmistakable. The name of Silas Blackwood was mentioned more than once, his recent paper on carnivorous plants dismissed with a certain competitive scorn. One young man, while repotting a fern, spoke of Armitage's unholy obsession with his orchid. Another, leaning against a stack of empty crates, muttered about the folly of staking one's reputation on a single bloom. It was then that a young woman, who had until that point remained silent while wiping her hands on an apron, stepped forward. She was introduced as Miss Amelia Dawson, the professor's chief research assistant. Her hands were stained with soil, but her manner was composed, and her voice, when she spoke, was steady and clear. The professor has been under a singular strain. It is not merely the exhibition. He believes Mr. Blackwood would stop at nothing to see him fail. There is no love lost between them, sir, none at all, Miss Amelia Dawson said. Holmes listened intently, his head tilted to one side as if weighing every word. He thanked her for her candor, and his eyes swept the grounds again. They finally settled on an old man, methodically turning over a flower bed near the greenhouse's northern wall, his spade rising and falling with a steady, quiet rhythm. The man wore stout boots and a thick woolen coat against the morning air, and did not seem to have noticed our presence at all. One moment, Watson. Let us consult an expert on the more terrestrial phenomena of this place, remarked Sherlock Holmes. The groundskeeper looked up as we approached. the metal of his spade grating against a stone in the soil. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles etched by sun and wind. He grumbled a greeting, leaning upon his spade, as Holmes began not with ghosts, but with the building itself. He gestured towards the roof. "You must work here at all hours. Have you ever noticed anything amiss with the structure? Any unusual sounds at night?" observed Sherlock Holmes. His reply was a low rumble. "Sounds? Nothing ghostly, if that's your meaning," groundskeeper said. He paused, considering. "But there's a draft, a right peculiar one," groundskeeper said. The old man leaned in closer. "On still nights you can hear a sort of scraping, a thin, metallic sound, like a wire being drawn over the ventilator frames, high up." He shrugged. "Always thought it was just the wind finding a loose slat," said groundskeeper. A flicker of triumph lit Holmes's eyes, a spark I was coming to know well. He thanked the man, pressing a shilling into his calloused palm. He turned us back towards the main path without another word. The wind whistled faintly through the high branches of a nearby elm, a sound that now seemed filled with a new and potent meaning. "There, Watson, do you see? The spectral presence becomes a draft. The ghostly wail becomes a metallic scrape. Our phantom is no incorporeal being. He is a creature of flesh and blood who understands the principles of ventilation and fears not the dark, but only the light of discovery," explained Sherlock Holmes. "Good heavens, Holmes, you mean to say someone climbed up there?" Dr. John Watson added. His smile was thin and sharp, and possessed the botanical knowledge to selectively poison a single plant from above. "The whispers in this garden speak not of spectres, but of a very specific expertise. Our next conversation, I think, must be with a man renowned for his knowledge of plant toxins. We shall call upon Mr. Silas Blackwood," deduced Sherlock Holmes. The groundskeeper's words about a metallic scraping near the high vents echoed in my thoughts as we crossed the university quadrangle. A damp chill hung in the air. Beside me, Holmes walked with a cat-like tread, his features sharp with concentration, while our companion, Victor Trevor, seemed merely bemused by the affair. Our Professor Armitage is a man of singular passion, but his rival, Mr. Blackwood, is a man of singular ambition. When passion is threatened by ambition, Watson, the results are rarely ethereal. They are, I suspect, grounded in something far more tangible, like chemistry," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Victor Trevor gave a short, skeptical laugh. "Chemistry, Holmes? I thought we were hunting a ghost. Are you suggesting Blackwood brewed up a phantom in one of his beakers?" Victor Trevor replied. Mr. Blackwood's laboratory was a world of stark order, a sharp contrast to Armitage's living greenhouse. The air bit with the scent of carbolic acid, and glass beakers stood in gleaming ranks, the only sound a low hiss from a gas flame. The man himself, Silas Blackwood, rose to greet us. He was handsome, with dark, piercing eyes and a mocking smile. Though he moved with a languid grace, I sensed a coiled tension beneath his calm demeanor. "Mr. Holmes, what an unexpected pleasure. I had heard you were concerning yourself with poor Armitage's spectral difficulties. Have you come to exorcise his ghost with your vaunted logic?" Mr. Silas Blackwood answered. "I am more concerned with the corporeal, Mr. Blackwood. Your own work has been somewhat eclipsed by the professor's new orchid, has it not? A pity, after so much effort," explained Sherlock Holmes. For a fraction of a second, a shadow passed across Blackwood's features, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He gave a dismissive wave of his hand, the movement just a little too theatrical to be natural. "Science is a marathon, not a sprint. As for the incidents concerning that rather overhyped blossom, I have been occupied. Last Tuesday, I delivered a lecture on cellular mitosis until 10. On Friday, I was here in this very room until well past midnight, attempting to isolate a new alkaloid. My notebooks will attest to it," answered Mr. Silas Blackwood. His alibi seemed impregnable. Yet as he spoke, I noticed my friend's gaze fixed not upon Blackwood's face, but upon a series of glass plates near the window. Minute crystalline residues dotted their surfaces. Holmes leaned forward, affecting a casual interest that I knew all too well masked a razor-sharp focus. Fascinating work, alkaloids. But these crystals, they bear a remarkable resemblance to the oxalate salts one finds in certain toxic fungi. Not your field of study, I should have thought, remarked Sherlock Holmes. A sharp intake of breath was Blackwood's only reply for a moment. He quickly composed himself, though his voice was a shade tighter than before when he answered. A mere side project, an intellectual curiosity. One must understand the agents of decay to appreciate the mechanisms of growth. Mr. Sealers Blackwood replied. We took our leave shortly thereafter, the air thick with unspoken accusations. As the heavy laboratory door thudded shut behind us and we re-entered the damp quadrangle, Trevor broke the silence. He seems a rather cold fish, I'll grant you, but his alibi sounded solid. A man can't be in two places at once, can he? Responded Victor Trevor. Holmes stopped and turned to us, his eyes gleaming with a triumphant light. A man cannot, Trevor, but his tools can. His alibi is a fortress, but he left the postern gate wide open. He claims to study growth, yet he perfects the tools of decay. His research is not on alkaloids, but on phytotoxins, poisons designed to attack specific plant life with precision. The kind of poison that could make an orchid wither on its stem, appearing to all the world as a spectral blight. The man is our saboteur, but proof in a laboratory is not proof in a court. We must observe the phantom at its work, Sherlock Holmes said. He fixed his gaze upon our companion, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial pitch. Trevor, I shall require your assistance tonight. We have an appointment with a ghost. Trevor, far from being intimidated, straightened his shoulders, a grin spreading across his face. An appointment with a ghost. Splendid. Just tell me where to stand, Holmes. I've always wanted to meet one, remarked Victor Trevor. As night fell, the great university greenhouse transformed into a world of its own. Holmes and I crouched behind a thick curtain of tropical ferns, the last gas lamps in the distant quadrangle flickering out, plunging our glass palace into profound, chilling silence. A chilling place, Holmes. Are you certain anything, phantom or otherwise, will appear? Victor Trevor replied. I whispered, my breath fogging in the cool air. The air was heavy and humid, thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming night flowers, and a steady drip of condensation from a broad leaf nearby was the only sound to mark the passage of time. Patience, Trevor. Our spectral saboteur, if he is a creature of habit, prefers the solitude of the witching hour, declared Sherlock Holmes. His voice was a mere breath in the darkness, yet it carried the sharp edge of anticipation. I confess my own nerves were drawn taut. An hour crept by, then another. My limbs grew stiff, and the chill of the stone floor seeped into my bones. It was then, as my eyes were beginning to droop, that Holmes's hand shot out and gripped my arm. I followed his gaze upwards, towards the cavernous, dark ceiling. At first I saw nothing. Then a faint luminescence began to coalesce near the grated opening of a large ventilation shaft, some 30 feet above the ground. My word! What is that? Responded Victor Trevor. It was not a light, but rather a shimmering, phosphorescent mist, which slowly gathered itself into a vague, humanoid shape. My heart hammered against my ribs. Without a whisper of sound, the glowing form began to descend, drifting downwards with an eerie, unnatural grace that defied any notion of rope or wire. It drifted to a halt directly before Professor Armitage's prized orchid. The figure, now more distinct, raised its luminous arms. It made no move to touch the plant, but from its shimmering hands, a fine, glittering powder cascaded down upon the delicate, waxen petals. Where the dust settled, the flower seemed to recoil, its vibrant color dimming almost instantly. The sabotage was as silent as it was swift. Holmes, we must intervene. I made to rise, but his grip tightened like a vice. His eyes were fixed not on the spectre, but on the ventilation shaft high above. "Wait! The exit, Trevor. Observe the means of escape," observed Sherlock Holmes. No sooner had he spoken than the ghostly figure, its work complete, began to ascend. It did not climb, but was drawn upwards, accelerating rapidly as it rose, until it dissolved back into the darkness of the high vent and was gone. The entire episode had lasted less than a minute. A profound silence fell once more, broken only by my own unsteady breathing. We emerged from our hiding place, our footsteps echoing unnaturally in the stillness. Good heavens, Holmes! It vanished into the very air. "A phantom, just as Armitage claimed," answered Victor Trevor. But Holmes paid no mind to my outburst. A faint, cloying scent now mingled with the earthy aroma of the greenhouse. Upon the orchid and the stone pedestal on which it sat lay a fine dusting of the substance, which continued to emit a soft, greenish glow. From an inner pocket of his coat, he produced a small glass vial and a camel hair brush. With meticulous care, Holmes began to sweep the glowing powder from the stone into his vial. His movements were quick and precise, his face illuminated by the strange light of the very evidence he was collecting. "Phantoms do not leave behind particulate matter, my dear fellow. This is not the work of the supernatural, but of a very clever and very human agent, an agent who has just handed us the solution," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He stoppered the vial and held it up. In the dim moonlight, the captured dust swirled like a miniature galaxy, its cold light playing across the sharp, triumphant lines of my friend's face. "Our work here is done for the night. Now we must to the laboratory with all haste. This dust has a most fascinating tale to tell, and I am exceedingly keen to be the one to translate it," deduced Sherlock Holmes. We returned from our nocturnal vigil not to the familiar Baker Street rooms, but to the university's chemistry laboratory at Professor Finch's insistence. The air was thick with the acrid tang of sulfur and the sharp, clean scent of alcohol. From a corner, the low hiss of a Bunsen burner provided a steady counterpoint to the frantic beating of my own heart. Glass beakers chimed softly as Holmes arranged his equipment on a slate workbench, placing the glass slide containing the faint, luminous dust at its very center. But Holmes, the thing was a wraith. It had no substance. It simply vanished upwards, Victor Trevor replied. His voice was crisp, cutting through Trevor's agitated tone. "It vanished into the very medium it uses for transport, my dear fellow. Its lack of substance is, in fact, its most definitive feature." "Professor, if you would be so kind," Sherlock Holmes responded. Professor Finch, his eyes alight with academic curiosity, leaned over a powerful microscope, the brass knobs clicking softly as he made adjustments. With the delicate touch of a surgeon, Holmes slid the sample onto the stage, where it clicked securely into place. One by one, we each bent to the eyepiece. What I saw was not the amorphous grit I expected, but a collection of exquisitely formed particles, almost crystalline in their perfection, each glowing with a faint, internal light. His voice was a low murmur of astonishment. "Remarkable! This is no mineral dust, Holmes. It is organic. The structure is that of a spore or perhaps pollen," Professor Alistair Finch answered. "Precisely," Holmes replied, his voice taking on a theatrical flair. "And now, gentlemen, prepare yourselves for a private showing of our Spectral Saboteur's performance. Extinguish the lamps, if you please," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Darkness engulfed us, an oppressive void broken only by the soft shuffle of feet and the sound of held breath. Then, as if summoned by the blackness itself, a soft, ethereal luminescence began to emanate from the workbench. A ghostly, green-tinged glow painted our faces, transforming the dust on the slide into a living, cold fire. A sharp intake of breath was his only response. Victor Trevor answered. His voice, disembodied in the darkness, was calm and triumphant. "This is no chemical, gentlemen. It is organic. the pollen of a rare phosphorescent fungus, Amphilatus nocturnus, an organism, I should add, that our rival botanist, Mr. Silas Blackwood, knows intimately. His monograph on its unique bioluminescent and phytotoxic properties is the definitive work on the subject. Sherlock Holmes responded. The implication hung in the air, as visible as the glow itself. A connection, forged in obscure botanical knowledge, had been made. Blackwood's fungus. The old professor's voice was heavy with dawning horror. Of course. His paper detailed its devastating effect on the Orchidaceae family. The pollen is a potent phytotoxin. It doesn't just damage the petals, it inhibits cellular respiration, choking the very life from the plant, responded Professor Alastair Finch. A poison and a phantom, all in one, Holmes declared. The sound of heavy rings scraping along a metal rod echoed in the lab as he pulled back a curtain, allowing a spear of grey morning light to pierce the gloom. The perpetrator needs only to introduce a sufficient quantity into the ventilation shaft. The air currents do the rest, creating a shimmering, moving cloud that appears as a spectre in the dark, whilst the pollen itself settles upon the delicate petals of Armitage orchid and begins its silent, deadly work, observed Sherlock Holmes. It was diabolically simple. The ghost was the weapon. Its ethereal nature was not a disguise for the crime, but the very method of its execution. The airborne nature of the pollen confirmed it. The ventilator was the only possible delivery system. Then it must be Blackwood, he exclaimed, said Victor Trevor. He possesses the expertise, certainly. But the how is merely a path to the who. We need more than knowledge. We need proof of access and action. The true question is, who services that intricate system of vents? Who moves about that greenhouse, day after day, observing its rhythms, its people, its very breath? Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He began to clean his instruments, the sharp clink of glass and metal filling the silence. His movements were swift and meticulous, his mind clearly leaping ahead to the next phase of the hunt. His gaze was distant, his jaw set. Professor Armitage's assistant, he stated, his voice now devoid of all theatricality and sharpened to a fine point. Miss Amelia Dawson, I believe it is time I ascertain the true scope of her ambitions, remarked Sherlock Holmes. The acrid scent of chemicals clung to our coats as we left the laboratory and moved with purpose through the university's echoing stone corridors. Holmes's discovery of the phosphorescent pollen had electrified the air. Even Trevor, usually so boisterous, was grimly focused as he strode beside my friend. As for myself, I struggled to keep pace, caught as ever in the powerful wake of Holmes's logic. Our next port of call is the university library. The agent of destruction is known. Now we must understand the agent of intent, replied Sherlock Holmes. He offered no further explanation, a familiar and sometimes frustrating habit. Our search led us not to the main reading tables, but to a cramped alcove reserved for research assistants. The small space was a fortress of books and paper, smelling of old parchment. We found Miss Dawson there, the soft scratch of her pen the only sound breaking the library's low hum. When our shadows fell across her desk, she looked up, her face a mask of mild, scholarly annoyance. "Yes, may I help you, gentlemen?" answered Miss Amelia Dawson. "Indeed, Miss Dawson, your assistance is paramount. I have been admiring your dedication. Professor Armitage is fortunate to have an aide with such a comprehensive grasp of botanical literature," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. His gaze fell not on her, but on an open volume on her desk. Its pages were filled with meticulous diagrams of orchid cross-sections, a study far exceeding the duties of a mere assistant. A faint blush rose on Miss Dawson's cheeks. "I merely endeavor to be thorough in my work for the professor," remarked Miss Amelia Dawson. "Thoroughness is one thing. Original research is another entirely. These diagrams detail hybridization techniques that would, if successful, create a flower to rival Armitage's own. Your own work, I presume. Work for which another would undoubtedly take the credit, stated Sherlock Holmes. The atmosphere thickened. Miss Dawson's pen fell silent, the quiet now oppressive. Her white-knuckled grip on the ledger betrayed her strain. Trevor and I shared a glance, sensing her carefully constructed composure beginning to fracture. Your implications are baseless, sir, responded Miss Amelia Dawson. Her voice was low, but it trembled with a barely contained fury. I imply nothing. I state facts. You possess the most intimate knowledge of the greenhouse schedule. You knew precisely when the orchid would be vulnerable. You resent the professor for stifling your own brilliant work. You provided the access and the timing for its destruction. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. She rose slowly from her chair, her face pale. The carefully maintained mask of the diligent assistant had fallen away, revealing a raw and bitter ambition. He would have ruined me. Years of toil, my research stolen, my discoveries claimed. That orchid, his crowning glory, rooted in my work. Tell me, does a gardener not have the right to tend her own garden? Said Miss Amelia Dawson. By Jove, Holmes, the confession, she admits it all, Victor Trevor replied. A partial one, Trevor. Do not be hasty. Miss Dawson, your expertise is in hybridization and anatomy, is it not? An impressive field. But tell me, what do you know of phosphorescent fungi? Stated Sherlock Holmes. The question struck her like a physical blow. Confusion warred with anger on her face. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. That single moment of hesitation was all the answer Holmes required. He gave a slight, satisfied nod. Just as I thought. You were the key, Miss Dawson. You unlocked the door, but you were not the hand that crafted the weapon. You are a collaborator, not the architect of this scheme. Thank you for your time, replied Sherlock Holmes. He turned on his heel and strode from the alcove, leaving Miss Dawson standing amidst the ruins of her secret ambition. We hurried to follow, our footsteps sharp on the library floor. Without looking back, Holmes spoke, his voice a low, determined hum. She provided the when, Watson, but another provided the what. And the what was delivered by a very specific how. Our next task is clear. We must examine the method of delivery itself, observed Sherlock Holmes. Upon our return to the university greenhouse, the humid air felt heavier than before, thick with the scent of damp earth and wilting blossoms. A steady drip of condensation from a high pane of glass echoed the frantic beat of Professor Armitage's heart. He gestured vaguely towards the violated orchid, but Holmes paid it no mind. Instead, his gaze was fixed upwards, towards the high, iron filigree ventilation grates that ran along the apex of the glass roof. His voice was a reedy whisper, strained with impatience. Mr. Holmes, with all due respect, the orchid is the subject of the violation. The phantom's focus is terrestrial. What scientific purpose does staring at the ceiling serve? Responded Professor Thaddeus Armitage. Holmes did not so much as turn his head. Because, Professor, phantoms may float, but men must climb. The supernatural is a convenient narrative, but the laws of physics are immutable. Trevor, be a good fellow and fetch that stepladder, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Right then, the tall one from the parting shed should do, Victor Trevor said. Trevor departed without another word. We heard the distant scrape of the parting shed door. Moments later he returned, the ladder's wooden feet screeching harshly against the stone floor as he dragged it into position. With an agility that belied his lanky frame, Holmes ascended, the rungs groaning in protest under his weight. He produced his powerful lens and began a minute examination of the grate, his silence broken only by the faint scuffling of his boots against the metal frame. His voice, sharp and clear, carried down to us. Just as I suspected. Observe the scuff marks on the iron and here a deeper abrasion on the mortar. These are fresh. They speak not of entry, but of a hurried exit, a scramble upwards and away. Our spectre, it seems, is quite corporeal after all, deduced Sherlock Holmes. He then produced a slender pry bar from his coat pocket. A loud, protesting screech of metal echoed through the humid air as he forced the grate from its seating. With his lantern lit, he swung his legs over the edge and disappeared into the black maw of the ventilation shaft, leaving the three of us staring up into the darkness. Minutes passed in tense silence. We could hear only the muffled sound of his progress, a metallic shuffling that seemed to come from the very bones of the building. Then his voice emerged, hollowed and strangely distorted by the confines of the duct. "Watson, it's here. A veritable pathway leading from the greenhouse. Not ectoplasm, Professor, but mycology phosphorescent pollen, thick as dust," remarked Sherlock Holmes. He reappeared moments later, his coat front smeared with grime and dust. In his hand, he held a small glass vial containing a faintly luminous powder, a captured ghost. "There is only one way to be certain," he announced, his eyes gleaming. "We must follow the trail," declared Sherlock Holmes. He motioned for Trevor and me to follow him up the ladder. Professor Armitage, looking quite aghast at the prospect of entering the dark shaft, had no choice but to clamber hesitantly after us, his shoes slipping once on a metal rung. The shaft closed around us, a cramped tunnel of sheet metal. Stale air pressed against our faces as each breath and shuffle echoed unnervingly, amplified by the confined space. Holmes's lantern cast a moving circle of light before us, and within it we could clearly see the faint, glowing trail of particles clinging to the bottom of the duct, a ghostly river guiding us through the darkness. "Quietly now," he breathed, his voice a low command. "Our phantom's lair is at hand," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Ahead of us was another grate. Holmes extinguished his lantern with a soft click, plunging us into near total blackness. For a moment, there was only the faint glow of the pollen trail, which now terminated at the iron mesh. As our eyes adjusted, we could peer down into a laboratory. The low hiss of a Bunsen burner was the only sound. Below, we saw gleaming glassware, brass instruments, and a damning accusation in glowing dust. The phosphorescent trail was thickest on the floor just beyond the vent. We had found the source. We retreated with a shared sense of urgency, our footsteps sounding a hurried, metallic rhythm. Emerging from the vent into a dusty service corridor felt like surfacing from some great depth. The echoing clangor of the shaft gave way to a muffled quiet. Professor Armitage, his face pale and slick with perspiration, leaned against the wall, speechless. "There is your spectre, Professor. A man of science using one discipline to sabotage another. A most contemptible crime," Sherlock Holmes said. He then turned to Trevor and me, the last vestiges of the chase replaced by a look of grim satisfaction. His eyes were alight with the fire of imminent victory. His tone was final, leaving no room for argument. "The game, gentlemen, is complete. It only remains to announce checkmate. We shall convene the dilettantes at once." The meeting room of the Dilettante Detectives Club was a chamber of hushed anticipation. The air, usually thick with tobacco smoke and cheerful debate, was now heavy with unspoken accusations. A great fire roared in the hearth, its crackle and hiss the only sounds to disturb the strained silence. Professor Armitage sat hunched and visibly trembling in a great leather wingback, whilst his rival, Silas Blackwood, stood near the mantelpiece in a performance of indifference. Beside him, Miss Dawson was a study in brittle stillness. Beside me, our friend Victor Trevor leaned forward, his expression a mixture of loyalty and intense curiosity. My friend, Sherlock Holmes, had arranged them all like pieces on a chessboard, and now he prepared to make his final move. "I thank you all for attending this rather unorthodox gathering. We are here to lay a ghost to rest," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Holmes's voice, calm and clear, cut through the tension like a knife. He began to pace, his footsteps a measured rhythm on the Persian rug, punctuating each point of his explanation. Constable Grimshaw stood impassively by the door, a silent, uniformed promise of authority. "Professor Armitage," You described a spectral presence, a glowing phantom that plagued your greenhouse. Yet you also reported a distinct scraping sound from within the ventilation system, a most corporeal detail for a disembodied spirit, would you not agree? Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. I was terrified. I supposed it was part of the haunting, said Professor Thaddeus Armitage. Armitage's reply was a frayed whisper, his eyes wide with the memory of his fear. Indeed, a spirit that uses the vents. Upon inspection, I found scuff marks, not of a phantom, but of boots. The spectre did not vanish. It simply climbed upwards and away. Sherlock Holmes said. A murmur went through the room. Blackwood shifted his weight, his feigned nonchalance beginning to crack at the edges. The locked room was no mystery, merely a misdirection. The true entry point was above, through a system designed to carry air, but perfectly capable of carrying a man of slight build. Sherlock Holmes said. But the glow, Holmes. A man climbing through a vent shaft does not explain the spectral light Armitage swore he saw, commented Dr. John Watson. Holmes answered me, but his sharp gaze fell upon Silas Blackwood, whose condescending smirk had returned, though it seemed somewhat fixed. An excellent question, Watson. The glow was not ectoplasm, I assure you, but something far more fascinating. It was the pollen of a rare, phosphorescent fungus, stated Sherlock Holmes. Phosphorescent fungus. By Jove, Holmes, that's brilliant, responded Victor Trevor. Trevor's exclamation broke the spell for a moment. Holmes gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, but his gaze remained pinned on Silas Blackwood, whose smirk had now faltered completely. A fungus, Mr. Blackwood, which I am told is a particular specialty of yours. A fine dusting of it on a dark coat would create precisely the ethereal effect described. A trail of that same unique pollen led from the greenhouse vent directly to the door of your laboratory. Sherlock Holmes responded. This is pure conjecture, Holmes. An absurd fantasy spun from fungal spores, responded Mr. Silas Blackwood. Blackwood's voice was sharp with a rising panic that masqueraded as academic scorn. But Holmes did not even look at him. His eyes were now fixed upon the trembling form of Amelia Dawson. A man could not execute such a plan without intimate knowledge of the greenhouse's routines. He would need to know when the professor was absent, which nights the watchman was lax, remarked Sherlock Holmes. His gaze moved, slowly and deliberately, to settle upon Miss Dawson. She flinched as if struck, a tiny, sharp intake of breath audible in the silent room, and precisely how to administer the subtle poison that withered the orchid without leaving an obvious trace. He would need an accomplice on the inside, someone overlooked, underappreciated, and with a deep-seated knowledge of her employer's work, deduced Sherlock Holmes. A low, wretched sound escaped Miss Dawson. All eyes turned to her as she buried her face in her hands, her entire body shaking with a storm of sobs. Her composure, so rigidly maintained, had finally shattered. He promised me. He said the credit for my work would finally be recognized. That Armitage's failure would be my opportunity. Miss Amelia Dawson replied. Her confession hung in the air, damning and complete. Blackwood, his academic detachment obliterated, took a half-step towards her, his hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of murderous fury. With a sharp nod from Holmes, Constable Grimshaw's heavy boots sounded on the floorboards as he moved forward. The case of the Spectral Saboteur was at an end.